Legal is one thing, but then there's the non-legal part, and that's probably the most difficult discussion, is the ethical framework.
Right.
So at what point will we make sure that the patient is being helped? At what point do we make a decision as a healthcare professional to use AI or not, and be very conscious about it? What are scenarios where we say we draw the line here? Europe is extremely strict, for instance, with facial recognition as sort of a no-go. They call that, even in their legal framework, as a no-fly zone. There may be instances in where you say, okay, that's a bit black and white, and maybe there's something gray in the middle as well.
So we're here with Tom Braekeleirs. Thank you so much for your time today, Tom. Tom, you and I, we know each other from a long time ago when we were both at Microsoft.
Don't start counting.
I know, right? We were at Microsoft Belgium and Luxembourg together. You are a very busy guy. You are a coach. You are a moderator, keynote speaker. You are a researcher. You're obviously a podcast host. And you are also, first and foremost, maybe even a visiting professor at the University of Ghent for all things digital medical technology. And not only in this course, but just in all that you do, AI is front and center. So did I capture everything that you do? Help us understand a little bit what a day-to-day looks like for Tom Braekeleirs.
Oh, very confusing, usually day to day. It's always on the crossroad of innovation, healthcare, digital technology. And then I like to always link AI also to a bigger picture of digital technology in healthcare specifically. That's my domain, but digital technology is here to stay. AI is one part of it, and the transformation that we need to go through, whether you call it digital transformation or any transformation basically, has to do, of course, with technology, but not only technology, but also leadership is definitely one of them. Organization, the business model behind it. So it's a very multifaceted approach, and I try to remain active on all fronts. That's why my resume and my LinkedIn profile is extremely confusing for many people. I tried to summarize it a couple of months ago because people ask me, so what do you do now? Okay, let's make it a LinkedIn post.
There you go. Now, so you say it yourself, it's not just in, your academic career, let's call it, that you are focused on the healthcare side and medical technology, but you do a lot of, you have advisory roles and coaching roles in that world as well. The healthcare industry is an interesting one, especially when it comes to technology and innovation. I've worked over the years with many institutions, both in Europe and in right here in Toronto. We've got a lot of large hospitals here, and they can be both the most cautious to innovate and sometimes, the most ardent ones as well to want to see that change. And it's a scary world because quite literally lives are at stake when it comes to hospitals. And there's a lot of sensitive information that always raises quite a few questions when anybody wants to talk about a new technology for anything. Forget about even, generative AI. To add that to the mix. So what is your take on right now? I know that you don't just work in Belgium, you were actually quite recently in Toronto. What's your take on the adoption of innovation or the willingness to adopt of innovation in healthcare in general?
Well, that in itself is an interesting paradigm because healthcare historically has always been about innovation. When you look at medical innovations, whether it was the invention of vaccines, whether it was medicine, whether it was the pharma industry, it was always innovative, and today it still is. However, when it comes to process innovation, and typically digital innovation comes in the process, not per se in the care part. That is often a tricky one to get adoption and to get people's head around, okay, we should do this. And even though we know, and deep down we know that it's good for the patient, that it's good for the care provider, that it's also in some cases good for the payers because it's a very complicated business model as well. Whether it's in Canada or any other country, it's usually extremely complicated, but it's a very sensitive industry. I now call it specifically an industry because it is an industry, but when you talk to people from healthcare, typically they say it's more of a sector. It's not an industry.
Right. Yeah.
But it's
they don't have
industry,
customers.
let's face it.
They have patients.
No,
right?
They have patients, they have clients, whatever they want to call it. It's different. And the funny thing as well is that it's probably one of the only industries where the individual is both considered a customer, but also the moving object in the logistic flow, for instance. So it's a really interesting dynamic to see healthcare as sort of, as a whole, very complicated, very highly regulated due to the fact that we treat human beings. So it has to be highly regulated, but still, innovation has always been around. And in some cases, it's a very conservative sector to adopt innovation. So interesting dynamic.
Yeah. People are overwhelmed because there's so many things you can do right now because there's so many programs, there's so many pieces of technology. Do you see a very scattered approach, or are you starting to see with AI specific, AI fuel technology, let's call it, are you starting to see some trends emerge?
Well, there's one main theme that overarches any organization that embraces innovation, whether it's digital or non-digital. That's leadership. It's a clear, bar none kind of approach. If you don't have leadership, in the sense that a vision, willingness to execute, ability to execute, if you combine all of these, and that starts from the C-level and trickles down, but it's also personal leadership at every layer in the organization, that if you start from there, anything is basically possible. So that's kind of the overall trend in terms of organizations adopting innovation. If you look at the drivers, trends there typically are one really big one is value-based healthcare, which is kind of an evolution that we see where we no longer look at do we actually do the treatment as sort of a trigger for payment, but does the treatment provide the value that it should? In other words, is the patient helped out? Is the patient helped out in a way that it's in a good experience for the patient? Is the care provider being in the mix or being taken into account? And do we do all of this in sort of the most efficient way we can? Because it is an expensive industry, and in most countries, it's one of the biggest expenses for governments is healthcare. So, value-based healthcare, really thinking about what is the end value, is typically a trend that we see in many organizations arise.
Yeah. Now, the moment that you mention, in especially these more sensitive industries, that small acronym of an A and an I, a lot of people get a little worried, a little cautious. We talk about, there's a lot of different, subcategories of AI people talk about, and that includes both responsible AI and also acceptable AI. And I know that that's a key angle for you. Like, hey, in order to get to innovation, we have to focus on those particular subsets as well. So what are some of the thought patterns, if you will, or the elements that you want to share with your audience in order to make them more susceptible to this concept of, well, AI can be acceptable, it can be responsible if we do X, Y, Z?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. One is it starts with the name. I don't like artificial intelligence. It sounds too artificial.
Right.
So the term I like to use is augmented intelligence because it's supporting the individual, and I think that is key, not only in healthcare but in many industries, to get adoption of AI, that people consider it as sort of a tool. Microsoft couldn't have chosen a better name for their AI assistant, Copilot. It's really Copilot. It's not a pilot, it's a Copilot. So it's there to assist you when you need it. But if you look at acceptable AI, for me, there's 7 angles at which you can look at it. I won't go into all detail of all 7 of them, but the first 3 are typically already taken into consideration when you think about design thinking, for instance. So it's desirability, viability, and feasibility. So once you have these 3, you typically have a product. But then for AI, there's a couple of extra concerns. One is, of course, the whole compliancy framework and all legal things around it. There's in Europe, you have the AI Act, you have GDPR, but also in the US, you have a couple of AI mandates, executive orders, and what have you. So it's a very highly regulated, which is typically extremely difficult in healthcare to get approval. Now the FDA is on par. The European agency is looking into it. FDA has a bit of an advantage in that perspective. There's over 800 AI algorithms already approved for use in the US, for instance. But legal is one thing, but then there's the non-legal part, and that's probably the most difficult discussion, is the ethical framework.
Right.
So at what point will we make sure that the patient is being helped? At what point do we make a decision as a healthcare professional to use AI or not, and be very conscious about it? What are scenarios where we say we draw the line here? Europe is extremely strict, for instance, with facial recognition as sort of a no-go. They call that, even in their legal framework, as a no-fly zone. There may be instances in where you say, okay, that's a bit black and white, and maybe there's something gray in the middle as well. So ethical is definitely one. There's two that are pretty specific for healthcare. One is causality. And because in many industries, you can get away with, there's a correlation between two data points, and that correlation pops up every single time. So let's just use that correlation, and if it shows results and the business is there, we just take it for granted. In healthcare, there's always causality involved as well. So even if you have correlation and you have repeated correlation, is there a causal effect between the two data points, yes or no? And that's a difficult discussion, because typically these AI systems, they're pattern seekers, and they cannot always explain how they got to the correlation,
right?
Even if there's a hint of causality. So you will always need that human interaction to where AI can say, hey, I see clear correlation here. Causality, dear human, please help me out. So at this moment, we are not yet into causality in terms of AI. And then the last one, the seventh one, is explainability. And that's a really difficult one. At what level should you be able to explain AI? I think it's crucial that you can grasp why AI comes to a certain diagnosis, for instance, in healthcare, but should you be able to fully explain how it got to that decision? Is AI able, in a black box algorithm, for instance, is AI able to fully explain how it got to the conclusion? I'm not convinced. There's even no consensus at the moment in the academic world around what explainability is, sort of as a term.
That's
so it's
quite ironic, but okay.
Yeah. The thing about AI is that in some cases, and especially when it goes wrong, and those are the known cases, like the husky versus wolf kind of comparison that has been around, you can explain where it went wrong, but explaining where it went right is extremely difficult. So I think there's still lots of work to do in order to be able to fully understand how AI systems get to their conclusion. It's an attention point, but for me, it shouldn't be a showstopper to fully adopt AI, even if you know that it's always the same result and you cannot explain it. Just like us human beings, sometimes we have this gut feeling and we just follow the gut feeling, and we can't really explain why we went for that decision. And that's the same with AI.
Exactly. AI has its own gut, if you will. If we then think about keeping in mind and doing new things, if you're looking at, the ecosystem out there, we've talked about what's happening, some trends you see, some of the elements you think need to be there to be healthy. What is the one thing, if you can put your finger on that, what is the one thing that you would like to see the industry do more of right now?
Oh, that's a big question, of course. I think I would like to summarize it in sort of take a leap of faith. We know that AI is capable of doing amazing things. The recent announcement of OpenAI, it's moving at such a rapid pace, and we can sit in our sofas and boardrooms and discuss for months and years to come. But the world is evolving at such a rapid pace, and the results are staggering at the moment. So it would be a shame not to fully embrace it. So for me, it would be just, you know what, let's take the leap of faith. We know it's not perfect, but we will be better off with AI than without AI. That's my absolute conviction. So I hope the people get it, and I hope you get it as well.
I got it.